Hello, if you are watching this video, it is because you're interested in doing the optional paper write-up. So the paper write-up entails putting together a short method section that shares about the variables or information that was collected. And so it was from your survey. So a few weeks ago, I asked everyone in the class to fill out a survey. For some reason, if you hadn't, I'm showing you the PDF of it. And so this is what it was. You'll see this in the module that has the materials. So some of the variables that the honor students put together was interested in college students' sleep. And so there were two questions that measured college students' sleep. One was on a 1 to 10. One was just reporting how much sleep you had per night on average. Then they administered something called the Acute College Stress Scale. And so for that one, for each item, each of these are kind of different factors of stress for college students. People responded on a scale of 1 to 4, 0 to 4, with 0 being no stress, 4 being constant stress, and there were a bunch of different options. It was 12 items that you were asked about. Those 12 items became two subscales, the non-social stress scale and the social stress scale, and then a total score of acute college stress scale for the scale. Then they were asked how many hours do you work in 1 week, and then how much time do you spend on schoolwork, not in class, but like outside of class schoolwork. Then they were asked demographic variables, so just getting to know the college student, asking full-time or part-time, and then asking if they were honor students, college athletes, employed at Chandler Gilbert or employed elsewhere. And then did you take any synchronous, all online classes this semester? Just one would include a yes. And then biological sex. And so those were the measures. Of course, GPA, they were interested in GPA. So that was self-report, and then that was it. And so then this data was collected over a 2-week period, and then the data was analyzed to look at differences. And so I'm going to get to that in just 1 second. Before I get to the results, I just wanted to share the template that you're going to be working from in doing the optional write-up. And so you'll see this in the modules. You're going to need to make a copy of it. So to make a copy of it, you're going to go to File, you're going to go to Make a Copy, then you're going to make a copy of it. Then you're going to be working through this document. So I do have a worksheet that you go through and have different prompts for what you're going to be doing in the write-up. And so this is also in the document. You're going to refer to this. So the first thing you're going to want to do is pick, what am I going to report for 1 t-test and 1 correlation? So I'm going to show you a variety of different results from different research questions the honor students had. You're picking 1 t-test and 1 correlation. Depending on which one you pick, you also are going to have to add in a little bit of information about the participants. So if you picked comparing students who work full-time and part-time, which I don't think you can do because we didn't have enough sample, but you'd say we had 6 people who were full-time, we'd had 22 people who were part-time, and that would be in the participant section. And then for the results you'd report, I wanted to look at sleep differences for full-time and part-time. And so then that's the t-test you would work on. And maybe you're interested in sleep differences. So the correlation you picked was looking at sleep quality and sleep hours. And so that would be the 1 correlation that you would pick. So this is a helpful guide to kind of have you think about what you're doing. And then you're going to follow the template for the results section. And then I do have you do some critical thinking questions for the discussion section, the reflection section. And so again, you're going to use these 2 different things. So now I'm going to have us go ahead and look at the results. So be thinking about what you might want to choose. So you're going to see this output, you're going to have this output to view. So there were a total of 28 students who participated. So some of the information that honor students were interested in looking at was student employment. And so you can see that there were 26 people who responded to if they were employed elsewhere or not. There were 26 students who responded if they were student athletes or not. And then there were 28 students who responded about biological. Some of these variables were not able to do t-test comparisons because the sample sizes are too different. So for example, in full-time students, you had 23 students. In part-time students, you had 5. So there weren't any t-tests that were doing those comparisons. This just looked at student general demographics. So they were asked if they were an athlete, their employment status, and if they were an honor student. So for employed elsewhere, you had 18 students say yes. You had 8 students say no. For student athletes, you had 13 students say yes. You had 13 students say no. They also looked at, did you take an online asynchronous class or not? There are 11 students that said no, they did not. There were 17 that said yes, they did. So some of their coursework included an online asynchronous course. And then we had 23 students who were female and 5 that were male. And so biological sex was not something to look at for differences. These are all the variables, interval ratio variables. And so you can see you did have some people who chose not to do their self-reported GPA, or it could be that they were first semester students. So their data wasn't included in that. So this is the acute college stress scale for their social subscale. This is for the non-social subscale. This is for the total compare all the items for students, for those 12 items where a student responded from no stress to constant stress. The 1 to 10 measure of sleep quality. Again, here's our central tendency measures. You can see the mean was 5.39, the max is 10. You can see students had an average of saying they got about 6.2 hours of sleep. They're working about 17.1 hours a week, and they're doing about 19.3 hours of homework. Standard deviations are all right here. So these are all things you should know as far as dispersion. There's a large dispersion for how much work people do outside of class for schoolwork. There's also a large dispersion for how much work they do outside of class. These last but things right here are all things that we're trying to check for the assumptions of normality. So in using data, all the tests you've learned in this class, except for when we get to chi-square, you need to have a normal distribution. And so these are numbers we would check when we're running our program. Do we have that? The Shapiro-Wilk tells you if you have issues or not. So we did have issues in these distributions and this distribution. And so this distribution, whenever you have less than 0.05 significance, that means there was a challenge or an issue with your normality. The other thing you can look at is skewness and kurtosis. So those numbers so for this skewness line, you don't want it to be bigger or smaller than, you want it to be within -3 to 3. Those were okay. This one, we've got a large spread. So kurtosis is how kind of skinny or fat the distribution is, and it's wide. And we know that because for both of them, the standard deviation is the same size as the mean. So people are all over the place with individual differences in how much schoolwork they do in a week and how much work they do. This, I just want to show you, these are those nice normal distributions. So you can kind of see some of them, a lot of them came out normal, even though you're like, that's not a perfect bell curve. It's approximately normal. So you can peruse those as you would like. So one of your results is going to need to be a t-test, and one of it's going to need to be a correlation. So the correlation matrix, this is something that shows how all the different variables might be related to each other. If you see a flag right here, those stars, that means it's significant. More stars means more significant. You're going to see that I chose to have the data run as a spearmint. So you're going to learn about correlation. It's Pearson. There's a point by serial, which is when you have categorical data. And then there's spearmint. Spearmint is used when you have small sample sizes or you've got some issues in normality, which we did for this group. So you can see that this reported here, this is the R that's reported. This is the degrees of freedom. You'll see in the results right up, it says R, and then it has a number. And that number you put in the parentheses is the 26. And then GPA. And then the p-value is if it's significant or not. Again, less than 0.05 shows significant. So this guy was very close. Very close. That's an interesting one. It's 0.056. If it was 0.046, you'd see a star. So close to that one. For all of these, you'll see there's an R. There's not an R squared in the results section. You'll see I have an R squared, or that's that shared variance that's going on. You will calculate that. You just take the R. So if my R was 0.519, if I want to figure out the R squared to report it, I put 0.59 times 0.5. It's my R squared. So you're going to pick one of these to share. So I might be interested in, of course, hours of sleep should correlate with hours of sleep quality and hours of sleep. They're both measures of sleep, so that makes sense that those are correlated. We can also see there is a correlation between student stress for reporting the non-social stress and the social stress. And that makes sense too, because they're both measures of stress, even though they're different factors or different components. One's the social component, one's non-social. Non-social is like time management, financial problems, car problems, or transportation problems, those kinds of things. Okay, so you're going to pick one of those and report it. You can also see a couple more significance with work days and social. So when you're working more, you're having higher social stress. That's an interesting one. And then working, schoolwork, how much schoolwork you do is related to non-social. So the more hours of time you're spending on schoolwork, the more non-social stress you have. And so again, that included time management. So then if you were interested, you do not have to report any of these, but these are all the items from the acute stress college student scale. So you could see where students are at with these. Again, 4 means more stressed. So I included a couple of those: time management, schoolwork, relationships with family. Schoolwork and time management were part of the non-social. So then you have a bunch of different t-tests, and you're going to see that this is the student t-test that you learned in class, but we're going to want to report the Mann-Whitney or the Welsh for these, because a lot of these we did have issues with normality. So this first t-test grouping that I had a bunch of, which I thought I was taking out some of these that weren't significant for you guys. So this is, I'm trying to remember which one I ran first. Let's see. Oh, student athlete or not. Okay. So these are the means and standard deviations for comparing student athlete or not, comparing non-social stress, social stress, total stress, how much schoolwork they do, how much work they do employed, sleep quality, and sleep hours. So those are all our variables. If we go back up here, you can look at the p-values and see nothing is significant except for work. All right, so the work would be 1. So if you were interested in any of those other variables, you would just say there's no significant relationship, and you would report the T, and it would be N period, S period. If you were interested in reporting significance, so there is significance in how much work they do, and that makes sense. I'm going to go down here, and you would report the Mann-Whitney one for work, because work was a lot of, you had some differences. You can see athletes say they work an average of 8.3 hours in a week. And then non-athletes say they work 26.69 hours per week. And then both had pretty large standard deviations. So that's the only difference we have comparing athletes and non-athletes with our small sample size of 13 in each group. The rest of them, you'd still report the means and standard deviations for the two groups, but you're going to say there's no significant differences. Athletes don't get differences in sleep, don't have differences in stress. It's just work, which makes sense because they're doing work. They're just doing a lot of stuff with their team. All right, and then I included graphs if you want to see graphs. My next one, I went ahead and took out all the ones that weren't significant. And this is for if you're honors or not. And honors or not students had differences in, sorry, not honors or not. We had employed elsewhere. So employed elsewhere or not, the only difference that came up was work. And that makes sense. If you're employed elsewhere, you're working more. You're working more than students who are not employed elsewhere. And so it was highly significant. So, and I had to do a Welsh because we violated some assumptions. If you wanted to do that as your t-test, this is the mean for people who work 23.6 hours. This is the mean for people who don't work 7 days or aren't employed elsewhere. Aren't employed elsewhere. So they're doing some sort of work. It might be employed at Chandler Gilbert. So there were a couple students who said they were employed at Chandler Gilbert, or they're just doing little side jobs and they're not considering it full employment. So then my next set of t-tests were honors and non-honors students. So we had honors students as 11 and we had non-honor students as 16. And it is showing here that we do have significant differences in here. And let me just look to see. I picked both of those. You actually, for hours of sleep, actually both of these you could report the Welsh to me for both of these. So for both of these, it's showing there are differences for sleep hours and sleep quality for honors and non-honor students. And so it's showing that non-honor students are getting lower sleep quality and lower sleep, and honor students are getting higher sleep quality and higher sleep. So you have that as an interesting finding to report if you're interested in doing your t-test between comparing honors and non-honor students. And I think that's it, except for I thought, let's make sure all of these different, employed elsewhere or not. I thought I had covered that already. Yeah, so those are all your different options. You're just reporting one t-test and one correlation. And then you're going to report that into the template that's given. And so I hope this was helpful. And again, you can always come visit me in office hours as you're working through your papers or your paper for the optional write-up. Again, very optional and due finals week.